Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Experiential Realism. And joining me today is Professor James Tartaglia. James is a professor of metaphysical philosophy, defending metaphysical idealism and existential nihilism. And he is also an associate editor at the journal Human Affairs. He obtained his Ph.D. and other qualifications from UCL, and he is also a jazz saxophonist, mixing music with philosophical ideas. James has authored books such as Inner Space Philosophy, which is your most recent book.
That's right.
That's right. And A Defence of Nihilism, Philosophy in a Technological World, Gods and Titans, Philosophy in a Meaningless Life, and Rorty and the Mirror of Nature. Now, welcome, James.
Hi.
Yeah. The reason why I would like to talk to you, like I said to you before, I've only been an idealist for about 2 years, and I've joined some growing Facebook groups, such as the Hermetic Order of 21st Century Idealists, and also the Cheltenham and UK Philosophers Group. And I would like people to be aware of your ideas, because most people there take, for example, meaning seriously as an intrinsic part of reality.
Okay.
Some people would say it's an important layer of reality on top of the world of appearances and representations. But I think my aim here is to promulgate your ideas in those groups, and also this channel is linked to the Cheltenham and UK Philosophers podcast, where my friend Matt Gray has interviewed the likes of Donald Hoffman. So he'll probably also show this video there. I mean, once it gets uploaded.
My family all come from Cheltenham, actually.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, both my mum and my dad's side. I didn't grow up there myself. They moved away, but no, going right back to when Tartaglias came over from Italy. Yeah, it was Cheltenham, Gloucester area. That's where most of the family still live.
Wow. Wow. So perhaps you might want to talk to my friend Matt Gray at some point on his podcast.
Yeah, could do. Yeah, you see Tartaglia's ice cream around Gloucester. That was the ice cream company that the family originally came over with. I was in Rome for the World Forum of Philosophy just a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was great, and we took a day trip out to Monte Cassino, which is where the family was originally from. And if you know your World War II history, right, that was one of the major battles of World War II, the Battle of Monte Cassino, and we sort of travelled around there and saw presumably where the family originally came from. It was great, nice little town.
Wow, yeah, because Tartaglia is it an Italian name?
Yeah, it's Italian. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
They're from Monte Cassino. Yeah, in near Rome, or at least they were. They moved over 100 years ago.
Yeah, I see. Funnily enough, I've also got an Italian surname. I think it's from Sicily, Batista, and there's variants of that. So,
Arlindo sounds kind of Italian, no?
yeah, it's actually it's also Portuguese, because I'm Portuguese myself.
Oh, is that right? Okay, I lived in Portugal for a year. You know.
Yeah, but even the name Arlindo is quite rare, really. Not many people are called Arlindo, so I'm not even sure exactly where it's from, but yeah.
Right, it's Portuguese, eh? Huh. So you got
It's
Portuguese family, right? Oh, okay.
Yeah, you like
Right.
the Portuguese weather?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, no, as I say, we lived there up in the north of Portugal for a year. And the pictures on the front of my books are a Portuguese artist from Coimbra.
Oh, Coimbra, yeah.
Yeah, and we work together. He gives me the original art for all the books. I think he's an absolutely brilliant artist.
Wow. Well, I'm finding out more as we go along.
So big Portugal connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
Philosophy in the Meaningless Life. I wrote a lot of that book in Portugal actually when we were staying there.
Oh, I see. That's one of your is it a
That was
recent one?
2016.
Right. I
2016.
see.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife is planning to get me all your books, actually. If not for, my birthday's gone, actually, for probably around Christmas time. Yeah.
They're all too expensive. That's why the recent one I went with a different publisher, just thought it'd be a bit cheaper. I feel a bit guilty asking people to, like, unless you got a library, pay over 30 quid for a book. It's crazy, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Your book, Gods and Titans, right?
Mm, mm,
You provide 5 arguments for metaphysical idealism.
that's
So,
right. Yeah,
so you have, was it why is there anything at all, and then consciousness, the distinction between abstract and concrete, philosophy of time, and human history.
that's
And
right.
the question, why is there anything at all? Why is there something rather than nothing? Is quite a profound question.
Mm.
And I was wondering, answering that question, what makes you think it leads to idealism?
Well, this is one of the big ideas I had for writing that book. Actually, I mean, I think that question of why is there something rather than nothing is huge. For a lot of people, it's what first gets them interested in philosophy. I can remember as a kid finding it just extremely weird. Why is there a reality at all? And of course, as I say in the book, if you've got any acumen whatsoever, you're very quickly going to realize that a normal answer is not going to work. That's what's so weird about it. Okay. So the obvious answer is somebody made it. God, right? Okay. But then, yeah, every smart ass immediately says, oh, well, who made God? Right. Okay. And then you get into stuff about, well, God made himself. Well, how could he do that if he wasn't around to make himself? Well, he stands outside of time. Oh, what does that mean? I'm a necessary being that stands outside of time. It sounds very, very. Oh, so whatever you think about those ideas, as soon as you start to think, why is there something rather than nothing, you're into big philosophical territory. And the idea for that argument, I still think is pretty much right, to be honest. I mean, it's not hugely original. Kant says something quite similar in the Critique of Pure Reason. I've just kind of trimmed it down to stuff that I can believe in. But the basic point is, unless you're an idealist, you'll never possibly be able to get an answer to that question, right? And yet the question does make sense. You can try to dismiss the question as much as you like, right? And say, oh, it's just a confusion of words, and you're using the words nothing and something in the wrong way, and why shouldn't there be nothing, and why shouldn't reality have just gone on forever? But at the end of the day, it does make sense. It's a very strange question. You would expect to be able to answer that question, and it seems to me that if idealism is true, you can answer it, and there are no other good answers, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that there's a very, very big question there, right, and only one good answer strikes me as a very good reason to believe idealism. Okay, so why do I think it gives you a reason to believe idealism? Okay, so basically the idea is this, right? If reality itself is the reality that we know in space and time and that we understand kind of physically, right? Okay, very well. We've got a great physical account of the universe. I'm sure it'll all change in a couple of 100 years because that's what science does, right? Okay, but it's still extremely powerful and lets us to know. You can think of it as models for understanding things, and the models feed into technology, and we've got fantastic models. I mean, I don't understand any more than a very small proportion of our of hardly anything at all about what we understand about the world, right? But it's essentially a physical model. And then the idea is, well, if that's what reality is, you are never ever going to be able to have a sensible answer to the question of why is there something rather than nothing, right? Because you're going to be stuck in that very cycle of saying, well, either something made it, which doesn't make sense, or it's always been there, which doesn't make sense. Okay, because then you can always say, well, what about before then? What about before? Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Neither of the options make sense. But if idealism is true, okay, then experience is a reality that transcends the physical world. Okay, if experience is a reality that transcends the physical world, then there's no question of what came first or of it going on forever, because we're outside of space and time now. When we're finding the true nature of reality, we're not understanding things on that physical, spatial, temporal model which we use to understand the world. So that's why you can answer the question. There's a substantive reason you can answer the question. The reason you can answer the question is because reality is ultimately experiential and transcends space and time. Bam. I
Yeah.
like things. I like things
Yeah.
like that. There you go. That's the answer to the question. No, nothing else give. Yeah, if you don't go with that, then you end up saying, wow, the nature of God is mysterious because he can create himself. Or you end up saying, oh, it's a conceptual error. Or you say something like, oh, in the future science will come up with some completely amazing thing that we've not thought of yet. It's all kind of a bit of a cop out that doesn't really make sense. Whereas the idealist answer to me seems pretty straightforward. So I think that's a decent argument for believing it.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose that as a materialist, when I was looking for the answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing? I began to look into the, cosmology and quantum mechanics of Lawrence Krauss. I read his book, and then I read Nick Holt as well. And Nick Holt in particular, one of his books I read, basically in a nutshell, his explanation was, well, in the beginning, there were no laws. If there are no laws, there are no restrictions. Therefore, everything's permitted. And if everything's permitted, voila, the Big Bang and possibly other Big Bangs, and everything comes into being. But then you're left.
Well,
One
you've got a
thing,
beginning for a start, haven't you?
yeah,
It's like,
you have to have a
you
beginning
know,
for a start. Yeah,
yeah. It always gets me people like, oh yeah, anything was possible, or there were these abstract laws. Well, you've got something. You're talking about something. Then we're talking about, why is there anything at all? Even possibilities, even capacities, right? Why is there any kind of reality whatsoever? Yeah, I don't see why that is a question that doesn't make sense. We ask why there's gold in the mountain, or why planets are where they are, and we ask about everything else. How come one question about is got to be sort of cut out? We're not allowed to ask that question. Sounds
yeah,
there's a little bit of I don't know. There's a little bit of the old conspiracy theory about that, isn't it? At some level, right? We better not ask this question because our physical model of the world can't answer it really, and we all have to be materialists. Okay, why do we all have to be materialists? Because obviously, if you're not materialist, you must believe in God and all that kind of
yeah,
nonsense type stuff. Yeah, that's how materialists that's how materialism is so powerful. When I look back, I was telling you before this interview, I did my PhD as a
yeah,
materialist. I got my first job as a materialist, and then I kind of changed my mind, right? One of the things that changed my mind is the main thing that changed my mind is by this point, I'd spent 10 years trying to make sense of how consciousness could be something physical. And I kidded myself that it made sense again and again and again. Eventually, I thought to myself, hey, you're actually doing this job. You're actually supposed to be a philosopher, right? Okay. It's not supposed to be just like silly games and whatever. Okay. So you're supposed to be a grown up and you're supposed to think about what you think on this issue. And I thought, well, actually, it just doesn't make sense. And lots of the great philosophers from the past haven't believed it. In fact, most of them haven't believed it. Right. So that's kind of how it added up to me. And then I thought to myself, well, why? Why is everybody so if materialism's really got this massive problem at the center of it, i.e., consciousness doesn't make sense and never could, right? Why do so many people believe it? Why was I so prepared to believe it? And I thought to myself, well, because if you don't say that everything's physical, it sounds like you believe in spirits and magical stuff, and that you're not a thoroughly modern, serious, scientifically minded type person. Uh, more I learn about the history of philosophy, that's kind of been the main argument for materialism forever. It's just very, very poor reasoning because there's a difference between your metaphysical understanding of reality and science. Okay, you
yeah,
don't have to dispute science to have a different metaphysical understanding of reality. Somebody like Descartes didn't dispute science. He was one of the major scientists of his era, you know?
yeah, yeah. Do you find that sometimes um, the most prominent scientists who buy into materialism, or at least publicly they appear to do so, do you find that um, they play a semantic game sometimes? For example, Lawrence Krauss, when people said, "Well, you talk about a universe emerging from nothing," you talk about ex nihilo,
Hmm.
but the nothingness you talk about isn't really true nothingness.
It's not
In fact,
nothing anymore. No, it's got
yeah,
physical properties. Well, I think
yeah,
he actually says that at the start of the book, isn't it? It's like if you can't measure it, then there's no point in even talking about it. Well, it's like, well, if you can measure it, mate, it's really not nothing, is it? And of course, he got
yeah,
very cross about that and started swearing, and Daniel Dennett had to rap him on the knuckles and tell him not to be naughty boy for swearing at people, apparently.
Yeah, yeah.
but
It's so
but
strange.
there is a phenomenon of certain scientists, right? I don't think by any stretch of the imagination, we've got this. I know some scientists who come along to our talks who are fantastically sophisticated philosophers and would never say the kind of things that some of these public spokespeople for science suddenly say about philosophy. But in public, they slag it off so much. They hate philosophy so much. That guy, A.O. Wilson, the biologist, it's like, it's like philosophy is a bunch. What did he say? Philosophy is a bunch of failed models of how the brain works.
Oh no.
Crazy statements like this, or what's the guy who does God, Richard Dawkins,
Richard
right?
Dawkins, yeah.
He puts out a tweet and he says, what has Plato ever done for the world? I thought,
Oh my God.
I don't know, mate. I mean, I could recommend you some good introductions and you could like find out about it, but the implication, of course, is like this stuff's all nonsense, right? But then why are these guys so famous? Why do they make the money? It's people like Krauss and Dawkins for their philosophy, not for their bloody, physics or their biology. You got
Yeah,
Krauss writing, a big book supposedly solving this big philosophical problem which he apparently has contempt for.
yeah,
You got Dawkins telling us all not to believe in God, right? What's that
yeah,
apart from philosophy of religion? In what sense did your biology help you to do that? So I don't know. It
yeah,
seems like there's a lot of famous scientists out there who want to talk philosophy but publicly hate it. And I think, well, that's a bit ungrateful. If you want to do philosophy, that's great. Anybody can do philosophy, right? You don't have to spend your life like a poor schmuck like me, to sort of teaching young people. Not that that's not a great thing to do, right? Okay,
yeah,
so philosophy is there for everybody, but don't go around slagging it off, right? If you want to get involved, it's like somebody plays a lot of football and says, "I hate this game. It's a dirty, filthy game." You're coming out for another game of five-a-side. Oh yeah, sure, sure, sure. That's
yeah,
That makes sense. If you like it and you want to join in, that's fine. But don't like make these big stupid statements saying that it's all a load of nonsense.
yeah. And it's strange that coming from Richard Dawkins about Plato, because he has admitted that consciousness in the realm of evolutionary biology is an absolute mystery. And then
Mm.
you had, yeah, he's passed away now, but then it used to say, oh, consciousness is an illusion, which I thought was absurd. Because if you say consciousness is an illusion, you're practically saying it doesn't exist, because you only seem like, if you say you only seem like you're conscious, then you're practically saying that people aren't really conscious. So it doesn't make any sense. I understand that illusion doesn't mean that something doesn't exist. I understand that
Mm,
an
mm.
illusion is something that exists but doesn't appear to be what it seems. But when you apply that to consciousness, it is saying that it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's an incoherent view, and in a sense, right, I think that all materialism leads to it, but it is an incoherent view. I mean, okay, so it's supposed to be an illusion, so it just seems to me that I'm looking at the screen now and talking to you on this YouTube feed. Okay, so what, right? So the seeming is an illusion. The seeming is an illusion, right? So it
Mm,
seems to me that it seems this way, but it doesn't really seem this way. What the
yeah,
hell's that? What the hell's that supposed to mean?
yeah,
Right? I mean, it does seem a certain way, right? What you want as an unlimited materialist, illusionist, or whatever, okay, what you really want is just to say, yeah, the way it seems is perfectly describable by science. Okay, but they don't have that description, so they're forced into that sort of like position of saying, yeah, things don't really seem that way to you. So I think actually Dennett thought this out the most. So his ultimate view was, essentially we're all kind of robots. We're flesh and blood robots. There are ones being made with wires, etc. Okay,
yeah,
and a judgment is a sentence stated or something like that, right? Okay, so when we make judgments, our judgments are that I can currently see, the redness behind you on this video or something like that. Okay, but that's a false judgment. Okay, because what it's a correct judgment about is, I don't know, physical locations of the illumination on the screen or something like that. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a correct judgment. But the idea that there's something it's like, that I'm experiencing something, that's a false judgment. So basically, we're kind of like sort of chat GPT or something, right? Making these noises which mean something false. I think that's it. I think that something like ChatGPT is actually in a better situation than us, right? Because we're under the illusion that we're conscious, whereas they're not so stupid, right? They're not under the they're not under the illusion that they're conscious. So yeah.
Yeah.
So I think humans turn out to be a little bit, well, it's crazy stuff. The only reason anybody even takes this remotely serious is because they feel they have to be materialists. And why do they feel they have to be materialists? Well, I do think it's just a straightforward confusion about the nature of philosophy and metaphysics. They think that, deep down, they think that, in order to be pro-science and not believe in gods and not believe in magical spirits and this sort of thing, you have to be a materialist. It's
Yeah.
just completely wrong. It's just obligatory, just to prove that I'm a sensible, scientific-minded person. I have to believe this completely incoherent metaphysical view and deny my own experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, John Searle always used to say this sort of thing. What did Searle say when he had a debate with? I mean, I'm not a big fan of Searle's, to be honest, but I mean, he won all of those exchanges
Yeah.
with Dennett, and I don't understand how anybody could not think that, personally. But the one he says, what am I supposed to do when I'm talking to Daniel Dennett? Am I supposed to pinch myself and then report the pain in the Journal of Philosophy?
Yeah.
There's a good
Yeah.
point. I mean, what are you supposed to do if when somebody denies something that's manifestly true? Galen Strawson is always saying that as well. It's a form of, it's a kind of, I wouldn't say it's a form of insanity, but you're convinced that it must be true, so you're forced to find a way for it to be true. It's kind of the kind of delusion, like, supposing I had to believe that there was a green gorilla in this room right now. I just have to believe it, otherwise I'm going to die, my family's going to die, right? So I just use all of my intellectual abilities, such as they are, to persuade myself that there's a purple gorilla in this room.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a
Yeah.
bit like that. You come up with all sorts of weird things, wouldn't you? So it's like, actually there are green gorillas everywhere, and people don't usually recognize them because of blah blah blah. You come up with, clever people will come up with clever reasons, but ultimately, we're not forced to believe materialism. It's not
Yeah.
required.
It's not required. No, absolutely not.
It's
And
not
if I
required.
remember correctly, John Searle used to say that human brains are unlike computers because you get, it's something to do with syntax, and then you can't get, a computer can't derive meaning from the syntax or something like that.
That's right. Yeah, the old Chinese room argument. So
Yeah.
he's all computers do is they follow symbols in a systematic fashion, and by doing that, they can make noises as if they were talking to you and you're having an intelligent conversation with somebody. Okay, but the machine doesn't understand the noises it's making. It's just making noises. It's
Yeah.
people who understand the noises. And later on, started saying it isn't just the semantics that the machine's unaware of, it's actually syntax as well. Even
Yeah.
to see it as manipulating symbols requires a human being. I thought that was a good point to add on to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, his
Yeah.
original argument was, sort of manipulating symbols doesn't make you understand things. And then later on he came back very honest as far as philosophy goes, and said, actually, even manipulating symbols requires us to see it as manipulating symbols. If there's a old example, if on a distant planet, maybe the one behind you, there was a beach, right? And there's a stick or something, okay? And the wind blows around and moves the stick, and the stick ends up writing a Shakespeare sonnet or something, okay? That would just be a coincidence because of the physical shape, okay? It wouldn't really be a Shakespeare sonnet. It would just be a massive coincidence, if you see what I mean. Okay, so
Yeah.
a human being would read it like that, but ultimately it's just a bunch of random shapes on a beach, unless somebody deliberately, writes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Mm.
Yeah. With Dennett, I really don't see how he went there. Seen as he was so intelligent, and he failed to recognize that in order for us to be under the spell of an illusion, you have to be conscious in the first place. You have to be conscious in order to be deceived about things. And I was going to say, you also mentioned the distinction between abstract and concrete. So would you say that materialists tend to say that only what's concrete is real and they ignore everything else that's abstract? And what would you say that idealism considers both as different types of real? I mean, obviously what we observe in space-time reality isn't all there is, because things are also felt. So we have a world of representations, and then we have a world of meaning and stuff like that. So we derive meaning from the world of representations. Is that what you mean by abstract and concrete?
Yeah, I mean, I think the situation is a little bit different for the materialists. It's not so much that they only believe in the concrete, but well, they might think they do. You know, they kick a stone and say this is solid. You know, Plato talks about how materialists go around saying, stamping their feet and saying this is solid, and you know, I can feel it, etc. So that might be the kind of rhetoric for ordinary materialism, but actually, they don't really have much room for anything concrete as far as I can see, because it's all abstract. You know, how do you define an atom in terms of the relations it bears to electrons and the various parts of protons and the various forces, etc.? So you always, I mean, what physical science does is it's equations. It relates different terms to things. So like take E equals mc squared, the famous equation, right? You're relating energy to mass to the speed of light. Okay, so you're always relating one thing to another. So you end up with something relational. Old Richard Rorty used to have an example he used with this. He said, take numbers. He said, numbers are the ultimate example of something which is entirely relational. In the sense that if you know that the number is twice 2, half of 8, a third of 12, 4 times 1, etc., right? That's all there is to know about that particular number, right?
Yeah.
The number 4. There's nothing else to know. There's no intrinsic nature to the number 4, right? It's twice 2, half 8, a third of 12, you know, a tenth of 40. That's all there is. All there is to numbers is you relate them to other numbers, okay? And in a sense, that's what physical theory does as well. My point in that argument was there's also concrete stuff or intrinsic stuff, okay? As in what you're aware of now. What you can see, what you can hear, what you can feel, what you can taste.
Yeah.
You know, that's if you ask me, that's our yardstick for what really exists. You know, feelings are concrete. They're absolute things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So
they're definitely real. I mean, the illusionist has got it exactly the wrong way around, as any Cartesian could tell you, right? And they got it exactly the wrong way around. That's the one thing you can't doubt, which is experience. Why? Because it's a real concrete presence. It's where we get our idea of existence from that concrete presence.
So consciousness is the one thing that we can be sure of, basically. So it would be the noumenon, and then the world out there that we perceive that appears to be out there would be the phenomenon.
Would
you
you could say that. Yeah, you could put it in that way. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So there are some theoretical physicists. I don't know if you've heard of Max Tegmark.
I have, yes.
Yeah, and basically in his book, Our Mathematical Universe, he concludes that it's all derived from mathematics. So, and he describes himself as a Platonist. So everything is mathematics. But then he realized he left out consciousness. And funnily enough, after that research, he decided to look into consciousness. Would you say that when Einstein said, when he asked himself what breathes fire into the equations, do you think the answer is consciousness?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And Einstein also said somewhere or another, without consciousness, the universe would just be a pile of dirt. So he thought it was too. Yeah, he said that to Herbert Feigl, the one of the originators of the mind-body problem, a form of materialism. Interestingly, although Feigl's version is less problematic than others. What I would say about the Platonism and also Pythagoreanism, because they were very closely connected. Okay, so you have a kind of number worship, this idea that abstract numbers are ultimately real in some sense. Okay, but they never. But the Platonist tradition didn't fall in for the kind of missing out consciousness that can happen these days, because if you look at the sort of Neoplatonist tradition from, I'm quite into these guys at the moment, Plotinus and Proclus, etc. Okay, fundamental reality from the ultimate reality is soul.
Yeah.
Soul is everywhere. As a in the world we experience, there's soul everywhere. So although they have a very mathematical conception of reality, they don't miss out the concrete stuff. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And how about the philosophy of time? Is there an argument to be made based on time that reinforces idealism? I mean, time is problematic even for materialists. Well, I'd say materialists argue about what it means. Like some have a view that time is some kind of transcendent aspect of reality, or has to have always existed. It never emerged. Some bring up the Newtonian view of time, whereas others would say no, time is something, even though it's very hard for the human mind to comprehend, time is something that actually emerged with space. Do you have an argument based on time that says, well, only idealism can explain time rather than materialism? So in idealism, you'd say that everything exists in consciousness, and the notion of time and space can only exist if there's an awareness there, basically. I mean,
Yeah, well,
that good?
I had a go at making an argument like that, and I think there's something to it. I do find it definitely interesting. I mean, one problem I find with the sort of standard materialist interpretation of time is you end up saying that the present isn't real. I mean, that's become almost orthodoxy. I think that's a standard view in philosophy of time. And, my instincts are Cartesian enough to again say, well, in a sense, that can't be right. Okay. It can't be the case that this current moment doesn't enjoy some sort of privilege within my life. Okay. That it kind of stands on exactly the same basis as my 25th birthday, what I'm going to be doing in 10 years' time when I'm first born, No, there must be a sense in which, this bit where I'm talking to Arlindo on this, video, this is what's going on now. And then later on, I'm going to go shopping. And then tomorrow morning, I'm going to blah, blah, blah. Okay. But there must be some reality that's going on for this now. And the way I connect that with an argument for idealism is I say that on idealism, you can have, if you like, an absolute now. Okay, so you can say, rather than saying something is now relatively, you just say it absolutely. Okay, so by relative sense, I mean, this is now compared to an hour ago, and now compared with in an hour's time. Okay,
Yeah.
so compared with some point in the future and compared with some distant point. And you can do the same sort of thing with space. Okay, so you can say, well, look, I'm here in relation to that tree and this video and my desk and the stuff behind me. But with here, there's no real absolute here, right? All here's are kind of relative, right? It's relative to something else. Okay.
Yeah.
With now, on the other hand, I feel there must be something absolute. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any reality. There has to be an actual moment in which I'm aware of something concrete, whether it's a taste or a smell or something I can feel. There must kind of be an absolute now. Now, how is that possible in a world where we understand everything relative to something else? I think that what you have there is a kind of intimation to a transcendent reality, which is what I think consciousness is. It's a little bit like if you were having a dream. Okay, so
Yeah.
if you imagine this was a dream, the reality of your dream doesn't exist within the dream. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
what I mean by that, right, is if this, just imagine for a second this actually is a dream, right? So you're going to wake up in half an hour and go, shit, you know, I nodded off and I've missed the interview, right? I dreamt of doing the interview, okay, right? If that was right, then all the stuff that happened while you were asleep, while you were dreaming, all the stuff in the dream, as you might say, all right, that's not real. That's just dream stuff, okay? None of that's real. But it has some kind of reality, right? So outside of the dream, it must be, you know, it was true that while you were dreaming, you were experiencing red, that, you know, maybe you had a pain sensation or something like that. Okay, so that experiential stuff does have a reality, but it doesn't have a reality inside the dream. Okay, it
Yeah.
has a reality outside the dream in a wider context, right? So then the idea with time is that time does have a reality outside of this context, which is our waking life, right? You're not going to find the absolute now within our waking lives. You're going to find it in the transcendent reality, just as if this is a dream, you're going to find the yellows and the oranges outside of the dream and not within the dream.
Yeah.
That's basically the idea. It's a bit of a complicated one to put across, but I do think there's something to that. I think there has to be an absolute now, and idealism does at least give you some idea of what that might mean.
Yeah. I guess sometimes it's really hard to put it into words. You know, you might have some kind of idea in your head, and as Kafka once said, words or language is a very poor translation. And I was going to say, do you think altered states of consciousness are important to study what consciousness can do? Do you think, like, in order to understand these concepts of space and time as appearances in consciousness, it's wise to not just look at science and philosophy, but take into account perhaps personal experience? Because after all, we only have our minds to experiment with. So, say, for example, I've um, I've delved into meditation, lucid dreaming, and stuff like that, and I've reached a state once where basically it was like a blissful stillness, and it's like the slate had been wiped clean, and there were no memories, there was no sense of who I was, but there was an awareness. And only when I tried to conceptualize what was going on did the thoughts and the words and, like, what is this, where am I, who am I, and then it completely killed the original state. And I have to say, it was such a profound stillness. I find it hard to describe it, and it was almost like even time wasn't real. It just, for that moment, time was just not there, but there was an awareness that remained. And when I snapped out of that state, did everything come back? It's almost like if I wanted to describe that state, I needed to become human again, and I was back to being myself. And every time I tried to describe the state, my description isn't the state. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. It's it's that experience that the Neoplatonists spent their lives trying to achieve. They found it to be the most important thing you can do in philosophy. As they would see it, okay, what you were experiencing was the God within yourself.
Right.
Okay.
I stumbled upon it. I
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
expecting
right.
it.
Yeah. Henosis, they used to call they called it. It was a major achievement of their philosophy,
Oh, the emptying. Yeah.
an experiential confirmation of their idealist metaphysics, as they would see it. But I mean, certainly people have had these extraordinary experiences from the beginning within all our philosophical traditions, and they've been interpreted many different ways. And one thing they certainly show us is that it's worth thinking outside our ordinary categorizations of everyday life. That the once you've had that kind of experience, you realize that the ordinary way of conceiving stuff is not the final answer, that there can be other ways of experiencing things. Whether to go back to what you're asking me, whether I think that people need to actually have those experiences in order to learn something about reality. I don't know about that. I'm not so sure. Just the very fact of of it having happened. I mean, people like Plotinus and Proclus and the Neoplatonists, they're trying to revert to that state because they think that's their true inner godlike state. So they're trying to get themselves set up basically so that when they die, they release their souls into the cosmic consciousness. Okay, so but if you don't think that's happening so much, do you need to have those experiences in order to reflect philosophically on the world? Well, maybe, but maybe not. I mean, as you said yourself, it all seems rather ineffable. So you know that something's up
Yeah.
and you know that things are different. Okay, but yeah, could we have a language that described those kind of states that we could use to make more consistent sense of those extreme experiences? I guess that many of the hippies thought that we could, and many of them wrote a load of nonsense.
Yeah.
you know but within some of the great philosophical traditions, and the one I'm interested for this kind of stuff mostly is Neoplatonist. Yeah, I think there's an attempt in their sort of descriptions of how the one emanates down to soul and intellect and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's very complicated, right? But it's trying to make a certain kind of sense of some of the extraordinary experiences that it's possible to have, and also seeing them as revealing a kind of truth. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think any of that should be considered surprising or a cause for suspicion in any sense whatsoever, right? We're hunter gatherers. We've evolved a way of understanding the world that makes sense for the perspective of hunting mammoths and having kids and making sure the field's got enough crops and stuff. I don't see why anybody would assume that the true nature of reality had to be exactly like that. We can all accept everyday life to the extent that I know that this is true. We're having a chat on YouTube and blah blah blah, and I'll
Yeah.
check my email and all that sort of stuff, right? I mean, uh, you'd be crazy to doubt any of that sort of stuff, I think,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but there's no reason to think it's a final story.
Yeah.
No reason whatsoever. It's just practical.
Yeah. It is, and it is practical to behave as though solipsism isn't true, for example.
Well,
I have to assume that I'm speaking to another mind when I'm talking to you. So, some of these ideas, I mean, if
I don't think it would be actually. I think about it. I mean, is it actually? I don't know what you've maybe you have a view on this, but could I genuinely believe solipsism to be true and be sane? Because I wouldn't have thought so. I'd have thought if you genuinely, I genuinely don't believe I'm talking to another person on the, I just genuinely believe that. What do I think I am then? Some sort of like God or something? I mean,
yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I just don't think you can believe solipsism not without having lost it, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you might regard solipsism to be true if you're having a lucid dream, if you're dreaming and you know that you're dreaming, and you can manipulate things around you and characters around you. I suppose you could.
I
Uh,
suppose if you never woke up from it, yeah, that's right. Yeah, you
yeah.
could
Yeah.
you could start to think, oh Christ, all right, okay, so the
Yeah.
situation's not what I thought it was. Although even then, you're going to start to think to yourself, well, how did I get here? Right? How come I've got a public language to get all
Yeah.
fastidian for a second? But I mean, it does seem a bit of a coincidence, doesn't it? You just sort of suddenly appear with a language with all this ability, etc. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think you touched upon an important point, really, about ineffable experiences. Extraordinary experiences.
Mm.
They don't necessarily mean that we're tapping into a deeper layer of reality. I mean, we could just view them as just experiences that we have trouble conceptualizing.
Mm.
Because after all, we are storytellers. So anything we experience, we're going to tell a story about that. I mean, do you find that's a
Well,
that's
oh no, that's certainly true. I mean, like, people get drunk, and I don't think they naturally assume that there's any great insight into the nature of reality from the fact that they, can't walk properly and like, get a bit silly, etc. Okay, so the fact that you can alter your consciousness doesn't follow immediately that the altered state is more trustworthy. What's interesting is just the contrast. What's
Yeah.
interesting is that there are states in which ordinary concepts kind of break down, and you wonder why. What is it about the nature of reality that I can experience it in this way?
Yeah.
Whereas with being drunk, I don't think, when you're drunk, you don't think there's something about the nature of reality which is more trustworthy about the way I'm experiencing it. No, it isn't. It's less trustworthy. You're drunk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, not necessarily, but depends on what the experience is.
Yeah. It makes some people more creative. I think Christopher Hitchens used to rely on alcohol to get his creative juices going, but
Yeah,
it
I
doesn't
think
work for everyone.
a lot of people have been, creative people, generally
Yeah.
sort of reliant on this or that. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, right?
Mm.
Obviously, as a materialist, you used to think that when you die, that's it. There's nothing, right?
Mm.
And even me as a materialist, I got to the point where, to me, that was comforting. It's like, well, if I don't experience anymore at death, then nothing can get to me. Then I'm completely free, and I won't even worry about me, because there won't be a me to experience. That's what I used to tell myself.
That's Epicurus. You're an Epicurean.
Yeah,
No, no.
or at least I used to be,
Mm.
until idealism came into the picture. Um, so I began to think, okay, so there's a sense in which there is an eternal witness, and that changes things. And then it made me ask the question, well, if nature allows for some kind of afterlife, what might that be? I mean, how do you view death? What do you think happens at death?
I didn't really change my mind about it. I still think what I thought as a materialist about that. Now, I know that idealists don't typically. So, we were talking about, the Neoplatonists, and they certainly think your immortal soul is going to carry on. Bernardo Castrop, with his analytical idealism, he has a kind of immortality, right? You experience consciousness expansion when you die. So you sort of like merge with the whole of sentient reality. I would have thought that it's probably the end of experience, because I think that it's very hard. Although I'm not a materialist, I don't think we've got a superior form of knowledge to what the material world tells us. When we see people die and they decompose, well, we've got no real evidence to think of experience going on in the case of a sort of a dead person with a decomposed brain. So although I think that what happens is your consciousness then, in a sense, merges with the universal consciousness, I'd have thought that's a bit like pouring a can of Coke into the ocean, just sort of disappears.
Okay, let's unpack this. So you would say there's a kind of ego dissolution, which makes sense. But would you say that experience itself disappears? Because if there's only consciousness, then
No,
consciousness would be
no, no.
experience.
No, you're right. Yeah. So experience, so, if you're going to take the idealist view seriously, then your experiences, my experiences, those of animals, worms, anything in the rest of the galaxy, etc., that's what exists. Okay. And then we use various models to make sense of that. So we're in some sense a part. Of course, you can't think of it spatially, so it becomes complicated, right? But we're in some sense, each of us is in some sense a separate part of that kind of ocean of consciousness. Okay. It seems to me that at the end of life, that part will no longer be associated with a particular point of view. Um,
Right.
so so it just sort of kind of flows away. Of course, I could be completely wrong about that. There might be an afterlife, in which case it's going to be like, oh, right, I wasn't expecting that. But I mean, it's certainly possible, and I find you know Castrop's idea interesting, and also certainly in a certain way appealing, right? I mean, if somebody was about to die, I'd like to tell them that I think your consciousness is going to expand and it won't be the end. But I don't see any particular reason to believe it, and I'm a bit suspicious of anything like that when suddenly people find that there's, they get to live forever, or there turns out to be a god, or the universe tends to have this all creating purpose. It just seems a bit like too much like wishful thinking to me. It's like what people want. It's what people have always wanted. They always wanted to live forever. So lo and behold, you do. Yeah.
I've always said, right? I've always said that as a
Mm.
materialist, I've always said in conversations about the possibility of a God and afterlife, I used to say to people, just because there is an afterlife, or there might be an afterlife, doesn't mean that God exists, right? And you could also say the same thing the other way around. Even if there is a God, there is a chance that that God might say, well, that's how long you're going to live for. You're going to experience that, and then that's it. You're gone forever. Oblivion.
Yeah.
But taking idealism seriously, I think of experience. It's pan-experiential. I think you used that word at the beginning. It's like it's a reality made of experiences, at least from our human perspective. And I was going to ask you, have you looked into NDE studies and reports that people make, and they don't usually report these experiences straight away because usually they're reluctant to tell the doctors what they've seen when they nearly died, when the go flatline. And I must say, because for me, I think it's an important question, when you die, what happens? And when I looked at many of these experiences and the papers that have been published, these people seem to report things that they couldn't possibly know about that happen in the physical world, right? And they also report often going towards a bright light and then meeting with deceased relatives and stuff like that. And some of the relatives they see in this afterlife are people that turn out that they hadn't met before, people that actually died before they were born. And then the families say, based on their descriptions, they say, oh, actually, it looks like you saw this person. And then they show them the pictures, and the patients, the NDE patients, are like, oh my God, this is the person I saw. What do you make of that?
Well, I have heard that sort of thing said, and I think C.D. Broad, back in the first half of the 20th, did he write some lectures on psychical research? So he got interested in all that sort of thing. I guess I'm a skeptic. I'd have to see,
and that's fine. It's fine to be a skeptic.
Yeah, I'd have to.
I was also going to say, right, just very briefly,
I think I'd have to be involved in it. Just sort of being told this sort of stuff happens. You hear this thing. Somebody looks into an iron box on the other side of the world, and they can read this lottery number or whatever. It's like, okay, well, show me some, a bunch of psychologists and other scientists who've looked into the research here. Let's have some expert tell me that the box is this thick. Let's see this guy do it consistently. Otherwise, anything to do with really there are magical powers, or really things happen after we're dead, I'm just going to think to myself, well, people have wanted to believe that all around the world since the beginning of time. So I think, I think then the standard of evidence becomes huge. But maybe, I don't know, but
yeah.
it strikes me as unlikely. I bet good money on there not being anything to it.
The reason why I bring this up, and yes, I've thought about this. I take into account that a lot of people hope for an afterlife and they want to live forever and stuff like that, and it all sounds too good to be true, right? But many of these reported cases, they seem to back a type of, not necessarily Kastrup's analytic idealism, but they seem to back a kind of monistic idealism, because these people often report some kind of, like you said before, consciousness expansion. They feel like they are bigger or more than who they were on Earth. And then they feel like they're several people all at once, and they find it hard to, there's a kind of ineffability once they return and they try to explain these things, and they say, well, language doesn't quite convey it.
Yeah, that could be because they're having the kind of experience we were talking about earlier. I mean, like you see, a brain closes down, you get all sorts of chemicals get released, don't they, at the point at which you're dying. So maybe they're having this mystical experience of kenosis that mystics have spoken of throughout history. So when they come to, that's the kind of thing they remember. I mean, if you have these, one thing you can be sure about is, these experiences, once people have had them, you can't be readily dismissive of it.
Yeah,
It's an experience of universality where you have no, I mean, it's ineffable because it doesn't make sense, right? Because there you are having the experience, and yet you have a very distinct feeling that you're not there having the experience.
yeah.
So almost as a direct contradiction, as Plotinus would say, is that you experience a God within you. Why would you expect to be able to describe things in mortal human ways when you experience a God within you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Donald Hoffman's conscious realism? And he basically says that only conscious agents exist and everything else is derived from that, everything that you observe. And then he comes up with the amplituhedron, and basically it contains trillions of dimensions. It comes up with a mathematical model from which this universe is only a tiny derivative. He calls it like a cheap headset.
Oh,
And
okay.
and once you die, you take off the headset, and then you become aware of a wider reality. And then there's so many headsets that we can't possibly imagine that we could go into and experience. What do you think of that view?
Well, I don't know it. I've not studied it, but I've heard that kind of. Is that a bit like Nick Bostrom talking about like how we're probably in a virtual reality? Do you know that
It's
argument?
it's a
Similar
bit
sort of
like
thing.
that, but not quite, because I would say Nick
Mm,
Bostrom is more of a physicalist theory
mm,
that we live. It's a bit
I
like the
see. So
Matrix.
Hoffman's got a sort of like his physics gives him different idealist dimensions or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
but basically
yeah.
Hoffman would say space-time
Mm.
is doomed. That's what he tends to say in his interviews. So space-time is doomed. He points to things that have happened at the Large Hadron Collider. So basically, when they smash up uh, particles and it creates these other subatomic particles, he said when they've tried to measure just a single trajectory from
Mm.
these collisions, if they assume that space-time is fundamental, then they end up with pages, countless pages of algebraic equations, and it just doesn't make sense. But when someone suggested, well, what if we consider space-time to just be another feature of reality, not the fundamental?
Mm.
So when they did that, uh, basically the maths got simpler. It was only just one page to describe a single trajectory. And what they found, I'm trying to do them justice here, but what they
Yeah.
found is that they discovered these new geometries that appear to be beyond the Planck scale, and these
Okay.
geometries they correlate, or they what's the word they used? They symmetrically map onto uh, the features of reality that we observe, like spin, mass, momentum. It all matches perfectly. So he derives his theory from that, and he assumes that consciousness is behind all of that because of its irreducibility. So he, in his theory, he says, well, only conscious agents are real, and everything else is derived from that, the world of appearances.
Hmm.
And basically all conscious agents, me, you, we form part of the one consciousness, because after all, consciousness is only one phenomenon, and there's the illusion of separation and stuff like that.
Mm.
And he also brings up Cantor's infinities, and he says, well, there's trillions of dimensions within the amplituhedron, which is the discovered geometric shape. And this presumably, because our space-time is only a tiny derivative, presumably there's also other realities, other, in his analogy, other headsets that we can experience, and reality might be far more, might be larger than we could possibly imagine. Far greater than the human mind can comprehend. But yeah,
Wow.
that's
Certainly sounds pretty heavy duty stuff. I mean, I'd have to take his word for it on a lot of that. But I mean, presumably he's right that they are going to discover an awful lot of amazing things about our physical universe in the future. I don't doubt that at all. And will consciousness have anything to do with that? You would have thought so. Maybe science could move in a different direction if it was based on a kind of idealist perspective. Certainly, from what you're telling me, a lot of the basic insights, which the essential insight that the physical world is a construction from our experiences. That sounds about right to me. And trying to have some conception of transcendence.
I was going to ask you, where does I don't know if it's a Neo-Platonist idea, the idea of the one,
it is, yeah.
Is Hoffman's theory pointing to kind of like Neoplatonism, or
it's been incredibly influential, that stuff, right throughout our history, and most people don't realize the extent to which. Well, I mean, okay, so the whole talk about the one originates with Parmenides, and then the Neoplatonists considered the most important metaphysical work of Plato to be his work on the Parmenides. So Plato wrote a dialogue about the Parmenides, and then he has an elderly Parmenides. It's a fictional meeting. It couldn't have really happened, but an elderly Parmenides meeting a kind of young, foolish Socrates. It's like the only time that Socrates ever loses. Okay, it's like Plato's two heroes are brought together, and they say some very complicated things about the one. So the whole dialogue is about that, and then that came to seem more important to later Platonists in the period you call Middle Platonism. And then when the Neoplatonists starts up with Plotinus, etc., then that idea of the one is the main focus. So, at the ultimate level, reality is the one, okay, because the idea is that something becomes more real the more unified it is. So if you think about a hive of bees, okay, all those bees buzzing around, okay, that's less real than a particular bee, if you think about it, because the bee is unified. Okay, so then the idea is, the most real thing is the most unified thing, which is the one. But that's and then from the one, which is the ultimate reality, the rest of reality emanates. In this phrase, you get used the great chain of being. It's a modern phrase. A guy called Lovejoy wrote a book on it. But you sort of go from the most real, and then you filter down to the least real, and the least real of all is the physical world. Okay, so it moves from the one to the physical world. So you move down from the one to intellect, which is like our understanding and thoughts about reality, and then to soul, and then soul kind of gets stuck in matter, and that's where we are in the sort of the least aware, and they're all kind of sort of poking they're trying to, their philosophy is all about poking their heads back up to experience the true reality, to merge with the one in this ineffable experience.
Right, because they tend to say this world is unreal, isn't it, or the least real, so it's real in a sense. But would you say that things in this world are less real because they're only transient? Say, like you look at an object or a person or a life form, and it doesn't last, whereas there are things that you can think of which don't seem to have a physical manifestation, but they're concepts which will be true for all time. Like, say, things in mathematics, for example, 2 + 2 will always equal 4, and even if it doesn't find a representation in a physical world, it's true for all time. Would you say that's more real than?
No, I kind of think, me personally, I think what's the most real is what's concrete, and that's experience, and experience is always changing. But for this, for the kind of Platonists we're talking about, okay, would they say that? They'd say that things which are always changing and don't live for very long lack the kind of unity that ideas and concepts have. Okay, so in a sense that they'd agree with that. Yeah, they'd agree with
that. Have you looked into the Vedas or Upanishads?
I have looked at a little bit.
I don't know if you've heard of Adi Shankara, and he basically brings up the clay pot analogy. So clay would be mind, and there's only the clay. And he would say the objects that you can make from clay, like pots, pans, uh, say even human forms,
Mm.
he would say they're unreal, they're only illusions. So that's analogous to the world of
Mm.
appearances, even including our own bodies. Everything that we can conceptualize as an object
Oh
is
yeah.
only transient, and for that reason, it's unreal. And he would say the only real thing would be mind. There was only ever mind. There was only ever clay, because the clay persists throughout. The forms come and go, but the clay remains despite the changes. It's the only real thing. How do you?
Yeah, well, that it's funny because that would be that's almost the opposite view to the Neoplatonist view, and there's quite a lot of speculation that the Neoplatonist view was influenced by Indian philosophy. There's a certain amount of evidence. I mean, it says in the life of Plotinus that he went on this expedition in order to try and meet up with Indian philosophers or Persian philosophers, right? And
Yeah,
then there are certain parallels between those ideas. Also, in Middle Platonists like Numenius, you get these influences as well, and he's operating at some point in places where we think there would have been a Buddhist teaching, for example, like Alexandria. So
yeah.
yeah, some of the meetings that happened with these different philosophical traditions, yeah. But no, what you're saying if he's saying that the clay is the most real, okay, for one of these Platonists, they say the clay is the least real, okay. So the clay is just the empty vessel which the forms shine on. Okay, so if you like,
Interesting.
there's the forms kind of shine down their reflection into each particular object, and the clay, if you like, or the physical stuff, is a kind of receptacle for the form, and it's the point at which reality kind of fades out. So you sort of start from the one, which is pure being, and it fades down until eventually you get the forms reflecting into matter, and matter is, like, if you like, the end. It's the fence at the end of reality. Okay, and
Yeah.
that's our situation. We've got stuck in that lowest conception of reality.
It sounds like Neoplatonism emphasizes these distinctions, whereas someone like Adi Shankara is coming from an Advaita Vedanta perspective. So uh, it's a non-dual perspective. It's
Yeah,
all.
maybe that's right. Maybe that's right. Yeah.
Could they all be saying? Could Neoplatonism and Advaita Vedanta be saying the same thing, but where one emphasizes these distinctions, the other one is more holistic, more like, well, yes, you can make these distinctions here and there, but it's separation is an illusion. In the end, reality is just one thing, one medium, as it were. I mean,
It is possible. I mean, I do see a lot of the same ideas occurring in different traditions, but the terminology is so different. It can be so in my new book, Inner Space, in the chapter 2, what I do is I run through various different philosophers from history that I like, and I do
right.
these things called encounters, right? Okay, so basically, I pretend to be. So I've set up a situation. It starts out right where I set up a situation where you are meeting in this sort of mysterious place. I don't know, heaven or whatever. Okay, and you're meeting Plato, and there he is. He's talking to you. Right. Okay. And I try and give a sort of, like, it's supposed to be a bit of fun, but I sort of, you get to talk to him for a while, get to know what he's like, and then he explains his philosophy in pretty straightforward terms, right? Then the next one I do after Plato, I skip forward some 600-700 years, and I do Plotinus. Okay, and again, you get to know what he's like living in Rome, and then he explains his philosophy to you again, and it turns out he, of course, very similar. Now, from his perspective, he's just a Platonist, so you would expect it to be similar, right? Okay, but then I move on to the Chinese Buddhist philosopher Xuanzang. He's in the 7th century, I think. Okay, so I do his philosophy, and again,
Yeah.
starts to look very, very similar again. Then I have to make up a figure for this, right? So I kind of got into this this West African philosophy, Akam philosophy. It wasn't written down traditionally; it's written down a lot now, okay, but it's been handed down over the centuries as a kind of oral tradition. So I made up this. I didn't make her up. I looked her up in a history book. She's some queen that nobody knows anything about. So I made her into a philosopher,
Yeah.
right? But anyway, her philosophy again comes out very similar, right? Different concepts. Then I did the 19th century British idealist Bradley, very posh chap, very a little bit aggressive, etc. He does his philosophy again, looks very, very similar, right? And then the final one, I make up this woman from the 35th century in the future. Okay.
All right.
All right. A
Yeah.
future
Why
philosophy.
not?
Zamina, her name is, and she lives in virtual reality and whatever. So I try and give you a little insight into what their philosophy is like. But surprise, surprise, it all turns out to be kind of the same. So yeah, I do think very much so. I do think that the same ideas appear in different vocabularies with different personalities within different, historical eras where people cared about different things, and but similar kind of ideas, I think, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I was going to ask you about the existential nihilist view. Uh, because it is very unusual, especially the groups that I frequent on Facebook. And I'm planning to promulgate your ideas, but it's very unusual to find an idealist and, and at the same time being a nihilist.
Yeah,
I
of
mean,
course. Your
yeah,
nihilist is your dark, miserable, scientific realist who says everything's terrible, right? And your idealist is like, believes in God and thinks the world's going to become a better. Yeah, that's true.
yeah,
These it's weird stereotypes. I mean, I'm an idealist and a nihilist just because I think both of those positions happen to be true, and I also think they've both been misunderstood quite a lot. So maybe I just like the underdog.
right. Is it
Yeah.
like absurdism? The universe is inherently irrational
I
and
think it's
meaningless.
different, right? So what all I mean by the word nihilism is there is no great cosmic purpose to human life. Okay, so we haven't been put here to worship God. We're not going to evolve into the universal pleasure ball or something like that. Okay, we haven't been here to stop an alien invasion or something like that. We're not here for any particular reason at all. Now, I don't think that's the same as absurdism, okay, because absurdists, I made this argument in my book where I talked about this, but the absurdist um, is saying, we take ourselves so important, to be so important, we really care about all these things we're doing. Here we are in my career and your career, etc., etc. But actually, it's all completely pointless. We're all going to die anyway, and how absurd. Okay, so the way a judgment of absurdity works, as Nagel, who defends this, points out very well, is you need a conception of something which you should take seriously, but then you can't. Okay, so the classic example is, the clown comes in and he's dressed up in this ridiculous suit, with a big bow tie, and like he's going to make this big speech, and then his trousers fall down. Okay,
Right.
so he wants you to take it seriously, but you can't because his trousers fell down, and he's generally absurd anyway, right? So the absurdist thinks that's what human life's like. There's us thinking that things like, I don't know, world peace and getting a mortgage and whatever matter, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so I don't agree with that because I don't see why nihilism undermines any of our ordinary activities, right? Okay, so when I accept that there's no cosmic purpose, what difference does that make to me trying to get a mortgage on my house? What difference does that make to me wanting to meet my friends and go down to that new pub that's opened? I don't see that it makes any difference. What I don't see that the lack of a cosmic purpose makes my life absurd in any way. You know, I mean, maybe my life is absurd to the great compared to the great and good, like, I don't know, Elon Musk. You can make that judgment, right? But
Yeah.
I don't see that just because the universe hasn't got a big cosmic arrow going on, that suddenly all the stuff I'm doing has less value or is less worth taking seriously, or like, it's a bit like my trousers just fell down. I don't see
Yeah.
it. Don't see it.
I
So.
see. So basically, existential nihilism is neither a positive or a negative view. It's like a neutral view.
Yeah, that's my view, and it's actually key. I'm actually making a little bit of progress on that because I thought it was only me who held that. But a new book came out last year by a guy called um, what's his name, Aribia Atto, and he defended it as well. So there's two of us now. Oh, and Tracy Lanera, the one I wrote with the book with us. There's three of us.
Yeah.
Maybe some of your listeners will join the neutral nihilist cause. Because it's the standard view is like, nihilism is this terrible thing, and once you accept that there's no cosmic purpose, why get out of bed in the morning, and like, might as well kill yourself, and blah 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 blah. And then there's some other people who think it's all wonderful. Oh yeah, I hate the meaning of life. The meaning of life so oppressive, it makes me feel so worried and anxious, and now I'm so happy. This is
Yeah.
what they call sunny nihilism. Nihilism's great. This seems to me kind of so-so. It's not good and it's not bad.
Right. Yeah. So basically, would you say your type of existential nihilism tries to view things from an unbiased perspective? So uh, yes, we can all derive meaning as human beings, but if we're going to look at the intrinsic nature of reality, it's meaningless, or it's without purpose, or it's not pointing to anything, like you said.
Yeah.
Is that the correct?
Yeah. Good
Right.
summary. Good summary. That's how I see it. Yeah.
I see. It reminds me of Sartre, wasn't it? Wasn't Sartre who said, for an object, uh, existence precedes essence, but for the
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
essence precedes
Similar, but
existence.
he's a bit negative about it, isn't he? So he says, man is a useless passion, and everything we do is gonna, fail, etc. I don't share any of the negativity. I mean, I don't think I ever thought that there was a meaning of life, and I don't see what's supposed to be so good about it. I mean, obviously, if there's a meaning of life where it turns out that I turn out to be the savior of the universe and I get to live forever with a big party as everybody, celebrates and says James saved the world, and like, that's great. I hope there's that kind of meaning of life, but maybe the meaning of life is, I don't know, like the kind of scary medieval ones where you get tortured forever if you didn't worship God enough. I'm quite happy with there not being one.
It's funny you say that, because as I've been reading into the literature of near-death experiences, and looking at all these reports and what they appear to be pointing to, often people, if it's not a bright light, it's beings of light that they meet, or they have some guides, and sometimes, not always, they get a life review,
Mm.
and people derive great meaning from their lives, and they fear that these beings are going to judge them. So I'm wondering if these beings represent some kind of mind at large. But anyway, they fear these beings are going to judge them. But then they realize that there's no judgment from the beings. And some of these beings have said, it doesn't matter what
Right.
happens. We have no opinion about your life. All that matters is what your life means to you. And often I see this coming up. And now, thinking of your existential, you see how I'm trying
Well,
to
good. If there
connect
are,
the
if
dots.
I am gonna be held to account by some beings, I'm glad they're not judgmental. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
That's good news. I'm glad that, yeah, man, it's cool. You
yeah.
you do you did
I'll
what you
tell you,
did what you did.
when you look at these experiences,
Yeah.
like 97% of them,
Mm.
and when they include, the bright light, which they say communicates with them telepathically, and it feels like one and many, refers to
It's
itself
very
in the singular and the plural, and they merge with it. And then when you get these beings, uh, 9 times out of 10, these people say, we're not being judged by anyone. We actually judge ourselves. And when they have these life reviews, they not only experience things from their perspective again, but they also start to feel the perspectives of others they affected, and then they end up blaming themselves, but then they feel compassion from these beings. And I'm thinking, perhaps it's not, there's always like a representational reality, even in these NDEs. They see beings of light, they see objects, or sometimes they see places, like colorful places. They see colors that go beyond the normal range, beyond the
It's
spectrum.
very culturally influenced, though, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
if they're going to describe them, there being a certain meaning to their life, for instance, people have only talked that way since Tolstoy popularized the language of meaning at the start of the 20th century. So if you went back far enough, they wouldn't put it like that. You wonder what they would say. Maybe it's just people's, I imagine a pretty scary time to be around right at the very end of your life. So I guess that's when you start taking seriously, have I been a good person? Do I have
Right.
religious beliefs that I might be punished? And
And
you
it
can
could
see.
have a great influence on their experiences.
I think so. I think so. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
not to say that doesn't happen. Maybe it does happen, but as my colleague Stephen Leach, who is a good old-fashioned skeptic, would say, that's the one thing we can never know for sure.
Yeah.
We're not gonna. You're gonna have to wait till you die, and then you probably won't find out anything either, because
Yeah.
there won't be anything to find out.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a skeptic too,
Mm,
although
mm,
I'm not dismissive. And sometimes my mind goes there, and I wonder about these things. So I try to
mm.
make connections. And I
Yeah.
wonder if these beings, when consciousness expands or whatever, if these beings represent the mind of the universe or nature that doesn't really care, is coming from that perspective that doesn't really care, but is also absorbing the human experience, because obviously consciousness as a human being, when you get that constricted perspective as a human being, it obviously starts to care about things because it's coming from that perspective. Does
I
that make
think
sense?
I think if I was going to start to really scrutinize these views, the first thing I'd ask is I'd say, right, okay, so there I am. Let's assume I'm in hospital, I've gone into a coma or something like that. Okay. And then I'm going to come to. Now, how am I making contact with these beings? Because if I'm having experiences as I would in a dream, for example, then they're not real beings, are they? They're elements of my dream. Um, so if they are real beings, I must somehow have moved beyond my dreaming experience, which I'm having in the hospital bed, because of something about the nature of reality. Okay, that's clearly the idea. But then my question would be, well, why would I take my experience in that way? I wouldn't normally take my experience in that way. If I had a very vivid dream, I'd wake up the next day and dismiss it. So why am I taking this experience so seriously? And presumably it's got a kind of ineffable nature to it. It's
Yeah.
one of these
Yeah.
sort of great, extraordinary experiences that people can have throughout time. Um, but then, okay, as a skeptic, I would then consider to myself, well, you know, here's two hypotheses. One, you have this extraordinary experience and you are at some level aware that you're dying, and okay, all this guilt and philosophy that you didn't do when you were alive is sort of adding up, and you're interpreting it in a kind of sort of supernatural way where you're encountering these beings. Or two, you really are encountering these beings. But then my question would be, okay, so how do you know that? How do you know it's just not a normal dream? So if you see, that's the kind of
Yeah.
way my scale. I'm not saying it's not possible. It is perfectly possible. Possibility is chief, right? It's
Yeah.
my favorite catchphrase. But I'd be skeptical. But if that is going to happen, I am glad it's the kind of beings
Yeah.
you're saying, because I would not like to sort of like die and then these super souls are saying, you did a very bad job.
No, no.
Do you know
Yeah.
the Voltaire's last words? I love this. It's got to be the best last words ever of a philosopher, right? So Voltaire was dying, and as you know, he was often suspected of atheism, etc. Okay. Anyway, the Catholic priest comes along, right? Very religious time, and the priest says to him, he says, "Do you renounce the devil and all of his works. And Voltaire says, no, now is not the time to be making new enemies.
Yeah, yeah. I guess
That's got to be
Voltaire.
the best last words ever. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely, definitely. And I guess he, if that's the experience he went through, which seems to be the case because they've been bringing back more and more people, in terms of resuscitation, they've been bringing back more and more people way past that threshold, that point of no return.
Well,
And
the point of no return is medical science's best attempt to track permanent cessation of consciousness, isn't it? So
yeah,
we can't be sure that we've got it exactly right. Maybe your heart can stop and you can carry on have experiences for a while, and God knows, who knows.
yeah. I mean, these people seem to be reporting like very rich experiences. I mean, I've looked into was it an Italian study to do with mnemonics, and basically they had these different groups, people who didn't report or didn't remember anything, so no NDEs, and people who did, and also like they would ask them questions like, do you think it was real? Do you think it was dreamed? How real was it for you, and stuff like that? And they were measuring their brains as well. So basically, what they found was, when people tended to remember NDEs, the brain activity tended to be similar to people remembering real events, like events that happened in waking life. Whereas people who were told, yeah, that's it, people who were told, well, the people who didn't remember anything, they were told, well, what do you think happened? Or, try and imagine something if you had an NDE. When they were coming up with like something imagined, the brain activity was different, and they're more akin to remembering a dream. So basically, more akin to remembering a dream or something imagined. So the brain activity differed, and what they found is the people who remembered NDEs, they tended to be profoundly changed, and they insisted that that was real, and it wasn't.
Well, philosopher A.J. Ayer famously had one, and it didn't change him. He was of the view that he'd just been talking nonsense. He had a very interesting dream, actually. He went back to his classical education. He believed he was on the River Styx waiting for the boatman Sharon to
Right.
take him across the road and give him the... But then he kind of ran away from the situation, and he did see the bright light, and he said there were some people talking about the government of the universe, and they were all very boring bureaucratic type characters, like politicians or something. And then he woke up, but no, he although when he woke up, he was saying something like, "You're all mad," apparently, and then he couldn't remember later on why he'd been saying "you're all mad,"
Right.
which is kind of interesting.
It's a logical positivist guy, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, although he did give up on logical positivism by that point. What Ayer said, he said it was a young man's theory, and I got it nearly all wrong, I think he said.
Right.
In fact,
Right.
yeah, I always liked Ayer. He's a very honest, sort of straightforward philosopher, super smart as well. I was going to say, here's a question, right? So if somehow I had the power to make it that you could have an afterlife, would you go for it? would you want this stuff to be true? Right. So two scenarios, right? One, you die and that's it. Consciousness cuts out, nothingness forevermore. Bam. Or option two, you have an afterlife along the lines of the kind which is suggested by these reports. Which would you go for?
I'll tell you something right now, because we're having this interesting conversation. I would be inclined to go for the afterlife because it provides a sense of adventure. I want to go there.
It
But
would be
then,
exciting. Yeah.
but sometimes, some days I'm feeling a bit depressed and down, and I think I'm done with all of this. And sometimes I find myself saying, well, I wish that materialism is true and there's no experience, so I'm rid of all of it. Sometimes I can get really depressive like that. So, but right now, present time, I
I
would.
think I entirely agree with you. It all depends on what it's going to be like, doesn't it? I mean, if it's going to be good, or even if it's going to be reasonably okay, yeah, sure, I'll have it. Yeah. what
Yeah,
what are you going to lose? I mean, but obviously, if I'm going to be poked by bloody devils for eternity, then I certainly don't want to have an afterlife, right? Okay, but I don't see any reason to believe that whatsoever. So, yeah, you need information about what it's like. But I do think it's a bit irrational when people just want an afterlife, whatever, right? Because
right.
because what's it going to be like? It might be awful, right? It might be like
Yeah,
this. It might be a nightmare you can't turn off forever.
yeah,
It's like an
yeah,
unending nightmare. I mean, like, yes, you need some more information about what. But if you ask me on the basis of the evidence and my awareness of how life works and what people have said in the past, etc., I wouldn't have thought. It carries on. But maybe.
yeah. And if it carries on, you're glad that these
If it,
beings won't
I
be
want it if it's
judgmental.
good. I want it if it's good. I don't want it if it's bad. I'll take it if it's middling.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So far from what I've seen, if NDEs say anything about an afterlife, if they're really glimpses of an afterlife, so far it all seems good. There's only a small fraction of NDEs which are kind of like nightmarish, but then they don't last for long, and it's usually to do with when people relinquish control, when they're not so fearful and they just go with the flow, then it turns from nightmarish to a pleasant experience. And it's usually experiences of bliss. And they say they feel loved, and they start saying things which most materialists would scoff at, like, oh, it's almost like everything's made of love. I feel this loving, and it's all pervasive. And,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
amazing, isn't it? Primary
yeah,
experience of the one is the experience of love, according
love.
to Neo-Platonists to come back. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, the one turns out to be perfectly good, and the thing that we love more than anything else. Yeah.
yeah,
It's a positive vision, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah.
I like philosophers that give you a possibility of a positive vision. It's nice.
Yeah, yeah, it's nice. But obviously, we have to be skeptical, and we have to be careful with
Yeah, you don't want to
our
be
own
you don't want
biases.
to believe something just because you want to believe it. You want to believe something because you think it's true, because that's what philosophy is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then that's what I've been doing all along. Uh, I got to the point where I thought, well, it's great that we don't experience anything. As a materialist back in the day, I thought, if we don't experience anything, then we're free of everything. I used to tell myself that, but then
Mm.
I came across certain things, and then I was introduced to idealism, and I began to think, well, I really just care about the truth. Regardless whether there's an afterlife or not, whether it's pleasant or not, I just want to know the truth. I want to know what's true.
It's the only way to engage with philosophical thought. Anything else, you can't reason yourself. I mean, it's always a danger. There's always a danger that you're trying to persuade, that without realizing it, you're trying to persuade yourself of
Yeah,
something just because you want it to be true. Okay, but that's an occupational hazard. But you've got to try your best to say, I just want to know what I've got a good reason to believe. I don't really care whether it's right or wrong. Or
yeah,
maybe you do care, but that's not why you believe it.
yeah. Is there a sense in which you can't escape meaning as a human being? Say for example, say a nihilist. A
Mm,
nihilist would say, well, I think it's all intrinsically meaningless.
mm.
But then there is a sense in which you could say to the nihilist, well, that's what reality means to you. The meaninglessness is what reality means to you, whereas to someone else who has
Mm,
different beliefs, it means something else. Does that make sense? It's like you can never escape meaning in the end.
I think that's too subjectivist. It seems okay. I think if a sensible nihilist, right, the kind of position which I believe, right, okay, there are bonkers versions of nihilism, right, okay, but very few as stupid as most people on the internet seem to think the idea is. Okay, I mean, a nihilist isn't denying that words have meanings. They're not denying that activities have meanings, right? Okay, there's a meaning to this kind of activity, right? Okay, if I start singing the national anthem at the top of my voice, right? Okay, this wouldn't be a very good YouTube video, and I'd make myself look like a
Go
bit of
for
an
it.
idiot. Right? Okay. There are certain rules and certain meanings about what we're doing all of the time. When I go out to the shops, it will be understood between me and the checkout lady, that I'm passing her to this, and she scans it, and then I put my card on. Our
Yeah,
lives are absolutely packed full of meanings, right? I mean, anybody who deny that is insane. Okay,
yeah,
the nihilist isn't claiming that that stuff doesn't exist. They're saying it's imposed by human beings.
yeah,
So, these meanings come from our shared understanding, the fact that we're all trying to work together. She's trying to make a living in the shop, you're trying to do YouTube stuff, I'm like trying to be a slightly outward focused academic, etc. Okay, so
yeah,
we're all trying to do this stuff, and it's not coming from the nature of reality itself, right? So in the standard view, right, the idea would be God made us in order to do X, in order to achieve project X. Okay,
yeah,
that doesn't to deny that God made us to achieve project X, right? So there's no really, really big meaning that all the shopping and the teeth cleaning and the YouTube videos contribute towards, right? To deny that there's this overall big goal isn't to deny that, that lady's going to know what I mean when I pass her my credit card in about an hour's time after I do this talk when I go shopping. I mean, you have to be insane to believe that. I mean, sometimes the way people criticize nihilism, you know what the internet's like. But you read comments like, it's a really low IQ. I saw this on one of my books. It's like a really low IQ philosophy. If nihilism were true, the words wouldn't mean anything. So you couldn't even say it. It's like, no,
that's going too far.
they're not,
Yeah,
they're not really what we're talking about. I mean, like,
no, not really.
we're talking about there not being an overall meaning to human life. We're not saying that there's no meaningful activities within human life. We're not saying that words don't have a meaning, right? It's just there's no big meaning that everything's pointing towards. Why is that an interesting idea? Because of most of human history, people have thought that there is a big meaning that everything's pointing towards.
Yeah,
That's been the standard view, and it still is among most people in the world, right? So the nihilist is saying something interesting, quite possibly false, but it's not a foolish thing to say.
yeah. Carl Jaspers, the
Mm,
philosopher, I think he's a psychiatrist as well.
mm.
He well, some people say that he manages to escape nihilism by appealing to ineffability. Do you think that's true? Do you think it's a cop out saying that he
That's
can?
what this guy said in his review of my philosophy and a meaningless life. I'd not really read much Jaspers at that point. I haven't looked at it since, and it's all a bit long-winded. I've read a couple. I mean, he's an interesting sort of guy, but a bit old-fashioned in my opinion. Um, Ineffability, well, I mean, there's a certain truth to that. I mean, I'm saying that ultimately things are transcendent. So if something's transcendent, then you can't really describe how it is. So it's in the same ballpark. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that. No. Mm.
Yeah, I was going to say you play music, right? You're a saxophonist. Do
I
you
do.
have a song about Hermes Trismegistus?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I love that one. It's yeah, I did that years and years ago. There's one at the end. I'm not quite sure what point I was trying to make with that track, but it does make me laugh. At the end, they invoke the spirit of Hermes Trismegistus in a Starbucks cafe.
Right.
We had yeah. I don't know. I didn't really have any serious point to make with that. It was a little bit of a joke piece, but I thought it was kind of cool. The sort of
Right.
artistic presentation of Hermes Trismegistus. But yeah, that tradition is an interesting one, which has quite a lot to do with the Neoplatonists as well. That was one of the
Yeah.
competitive
I mean,
theories
my
at that
my friend
time.
Stephen Wallard, he's got this channel called Hermetic Idealism, and he runs
Mm.
the Hermetic Order of 21st Century
Yeah.
Idealists.
Hermetic Emanations. That was the name of the track. Yes. See if he likes it. He can use it as his soundtrack.
Right. And he told me about the Kabbalion by the three initiates, and I looked into it. I was reading, and it's got all the principles. Of the first principle is the principle of mentalism, so idealism, and then you start.
Mm.
And as I went into the book, um, I saw that some of the concepts in the book uh, match uh, empirical evidence, science, like stuff like spectra, polarities, and this and that. And there seems to be like some kind of ancient wisdom which actually science is confirming, some of these
Wow.
observations about reality. But
Greek philosophy, it all came out of the same milieu of Middle Platonish, the
yeah,
uh, the Hermetic philosophers have very similar ideas, actually.
yeah,
Very similar
he's
ideas.
massively into this. You might want to talk to him, Stephen
Yeah,
Wallard, on the
right.
Hermetic Idealism podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I'll have to find out a bit more about it before I do that. But yeah, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I was just wondering if
Mm.
you were massively into that, seeing as you have a song about her.
Yeah, well, no, I'm interested from the outside. I keep meaning to buy the proper edition of the Hermetic corpus of the writings. It'd be interesting. I've got too many things to read. Too many things to read.
Oh, same here,
Mm.
same here. Um, how did materialism start? Was it like a political enterprise, or like against the church because the church had too much power and ostracized people? And
I don't think it started like that. It started from a priori reasoning from, if you have a brick and you cut it in two and then you cut it in two again, then you cut it in two again, eventually you're going to have to get to the smallest unit of matter, right? So it was that abstract
right,
reasoning from um, who was it? Democritus.
oh yeah,
Uh,
the atomist,
but
yeah,
yeah,
Democritus, yeah,
exactly. But it very soon takes on political dimensions with the Epicureans and the Stoics, to the extent that they buy into atomism, and it becomes so. The Epicurean idea is a sort of like one of the main reasons that materialism hit off, and it's the idea that you're wasting your time in worshipping the gods. So institutions of organized religion are kind of a rip-off, because people don't know about the gods, if they even exist, and if they even exist, they're not interested in us. So it's just a way of institutions taking power over people. So there's this kind of suspicion of the clergy and religious institutions, and materialism. So Lucretius, the Roman poet, famously said, "How many crimes have been committed in the name of religion?" Okay, that's something that people
yeah,
often repeat, but that's as part of a defense of materialism. Um, and then Lucretius becomes very important in the Renaissance, and the sort of rediscovery of Greek learning. And then when you do that, you look back at Lucretius, and he's very much saying, let's break the power of it ties in with, given how many religious wars there are in Europe at the time, the idea of being a rational materialist and breaking the power of the church, and moving institutions and knowledge away from religion. It's the same kind of movement you get with the Protestants, saying that you should be able to read this book. Let's have rational
yeah.
religion. It's breaking the power of the priests. Um,
He sounds
so
like an ancient Christopher Hitchens,
bit
very
like the
anti-theist.
Yeah. I mean, it very much is, actually. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Materialism. I mean, it's not coincidence that Marx is a materialist, right?
yeah,
That's one thing I always just find that slightly odd. It's like, okay, so historical materialism, and they do mean kind of political things like this, but actually, it's pure metaphysical materialism at the center of it, right?
yeah,
That's what Marx did his Ph.D. on. I think it was the difference between Epicurus's materialism and Democritus's materialism. I think that was
yeah.
what his PhD. But he saw it as a key to understanding the world, because if you understand everything in physical terms, then you have to sort of redistribute the atoms. You have to make sure that the poor and the rich get a sort of decent distribution of
Yeah.
the atoms, which are what ultimately exist. It's a very political idea. I never used to realize that. When I was a student, when I was a committed materialist, I didn't realize it had anything to do with politics whatsoever. So actually, a good book, Mary Midgley, Poetry and Science. She talks about the sort of historical influence
Right.
of materialism. It's fascinating. Uh,
Yeah. I'm going to look into that actually.
Yeah, it's a good
Yeah,
book.
because so basically materialism was weaponized. It did start from philosophy and the
Yeah,
theory of the atoms, and then
it took on a political social role, which would, that's why people were suspicious of it. It was associated with atheism, or at least with looking away from the church. But then, in the Enlightenment, it also gets associated with free thinking, breaking away from the church, so
yeah,
um
yeah,
and it carries on like that in the 19th century as well. Materialism is a bit dangerous. um you know
yeah.
um
I found it appealing, the idea of being a free thinker and breaking away from the church or religion. I was brought up a Catholic. My mum is still religious, but you get a sense of freedom, don't you, when you're a materialist and you're an atheist? It's quite appealing in a way,
yeah,
and
yeah,
also
but the thing
especially in those
is,
times, the church was quite oppressive, weren't they? And you had the
they were.
Inquisition.
Mm. So you can't blame materialists for making those associations, but it just seems to me that in the contemporary world, you should realize that I can be an idealist or a dualist or a panpsychist or a neutral monist or any of these other metaphysical positions, whilst also being an atheist and also thinking, for example, that I don't know, the church is a corrupt institution and should be replaced by science institutions. Or, I mean, there's no reason you shouldn't think all of that, right? It's
Yeah,
not what and I think to if materialism is going to decline, and I think it's a pretty lousy philosophy, to be honest. I mean, it might have had its uses in the past, but I don't think it does us any good now. Um, not in a world where we're moving into making robots and having virtual realities, and people are sort of starting to think that consciousness might be an illusion, and we might be the same as Chat GPT or any of this crazy. Yeah, at that point, seems to me that human history has reached a point where materialism is a pain in the ass. Not only does it not do its proper metaphysical job of explaining very much at all, because it's got this huge problem with consciousness which can't be solved, but not only that, it's just pushing us into weird social directions. I really don't think it's a good philosophy for us to have now. And I think the way that you break the power of it and you stop it from being the respectable view is you just point out to everybody that atheism and materialism and scientific rationalism do not go together as a package. Okay, that
yeah,
is one particular metaphysics you can have. You can be fully behind science, fully behind breaking the power of the church or whatever the hell it is, right? And a completely ardent atheist, but also a dualist or an idealist or a panpsychist. Metaphysics of materialism is just one metaphysical option, and it's not a very good one. Then I'm sure that when you first became a materialist, at some level, the connection between not believing in God and being a materialist was appealing to you, to show everybody that you were I'm not a Catholic anymore. I'm a reasonable, free thinking person. I'm sure. Well, for me, I don't think it was that so much, because I don't really think I ever had any strong religious beliefs. I mean, I don't remember that well. Okay, I just think it was
yeah,
wanting to be taken seriously and be respectable at university, right? So I thought, well, obviously this is what people believe these days. So I'm gonna. It made sense to me as well, so I follow through on that. It all sounds a bit weird, thinking that you've got a non-physical mind. What's that supposed to be? Oh, just superstitious, old-fashioned stuff.
yeah,
People think that just because they don't understand it very well. It's a
yeah,
lack. It's a lack of understanding.
yeah. I mean, I've never obviously I broke away from religious beliefs, and I became enamored with science and free thinking and philosophy, and I've never really been a strong atheist. I think I arrived at atheism, but in the agnostic sense, so agnostic atheism, or I behave as though there is no God isn't there. Basically, I'm not making the claim that there definitely isn't any kind of God
Yeah,
or deity. So I'm agnostic atheist until
yeah.
someone demonstrates that a God exists. Then I'll believe in it. So that's how I would look at it. But then I
I
came to realize that people mean different things by the word God. So when someone asks you, "Do you believe in God?" we tend to assume that that person means the typical God of the Abrahamic religions, don't we? Especially here in the West, we assume it's going to be Yahweh, or some God that exists outside of the universe is a kind of person that is all powerful and judges people and is wrathful and stuff like that, or something along those lines. But now in this day and age, I tend to ask, well, what do you mean by God? And then I'll decide whether I'm an atheist in regards to it or not. Does that make sense? Is that how you?
Yeah. No, I don't think we think anything much different. I mean, I'd call myself an atheist, not because I know that there's definitely no God. There might be a God, but I just don't think there is. So I guess the correct term for somebody who doesn't think that there is an atheist. That's all there is to it. But I mean, yeah, certainly wouldn't rule it out. It's perfectly possible. People have always believed in God. Maybe they're right.
Yeah. If someone, say an idealist, right? I know in idealism you can be a theist or an atheist, but say like if an idealist says to you, well, I believe consciousness is God. I believe that consciousness is everywhere and exists in me, and we're all it, and it has a creative principle and creates the world of appearances, and nothing can be said to exist without consciousness. If that's what they mean by God, then obviously there's not much room to say, well, I don't believe in that God. But then at the same time, you might say, well, why call it God? But then the idealist theist might say, well, I believe I call it God because consciousness has the potential, even in the human form, to know an infinite number of things, even if it takes time. In the course of time, you might forget some things and you learn new things. And if a human could live forever, he'd be able to learn an infinite number of things. And if you're not human and just consciousness, well, consciousness can include an infinitude of worlds or concepts. Consciousness is the very ground of existence. It might give you a kind of argument like that. Would you oppose consciousness being called God or being viewed as God?
It sounds a bit like Spinoza's philosophy. I think what you're
right. Spinoza's God
describing. I don't believe that view myself because I've got certain views about our knowledge of consciousness, which I don't think is very good. So I don't really see how you'd be able to use that knowledge of consciousness in order to form the view that there is such a thing as a God. But I'd certainly listen to what they had to say. Yeah, it's an interesting view, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, we are consciousness basically, but I would still say that there's a lot to learn from ourselves and our own nature. And if we are consciousness, then there's so many states of mind that we could tap into, really, even to do with dreams or meditation or lucid dreaming. I sometimes find myself having lucid dreams, and I can experience some things in these dreams, vivid colors that, or a kind of hyper real quality that you don't find in real life. So to me, I tend to think, well, that's the potential of my own consciousness to do much more than what I'm used to in the waking state, for example.
I quite envy you. I always, I've had a go at that. I've never been very good at just the second I realise I kind of wake up. But I know other people who do it. I've had students who can lucid dream. Yeah, you're right. That's why I would kind of rather we had an idealist philosophy. Not only do I think the arguments are better for it, but it just seems to be crazy in a world where we get more and more focused on experience, on virtual realities, on possibility of alternative experiences, like you say, and yet we have an official philosophy that makes it very hard to believe that consciousness isn't just an illusion. I'd rather have a philosophy which places consciousness at the center of our conception of reality, so we can focus on exactly the kind of things you're talking about.
Yeah. I don't know if you'd like to go now. I mean, if you want to finish here, or
I think maybe it's been a couple of hours and I've got to talk to somebody, but that's been great. I don't need to check that though. You can use any of that. That's
Yeah,
cool.
you sure?
Yeah, yeah,
Everything's cool.
yeah.
No problem. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me about all these issues. And I'm going to be you know I'm going to be promulgating your ideas everywhere on the Facebook groups and because I
Fantastic.
want to
Send
see
me
how
a
I want to see how people discuss these ideas and like especially the Cheltenham and UK philosophers group. They are philosophers, so they are going to be unpacking our conversation.
yeah,
It'll
yeah,
be
definitely,
interesting.
definitely. Yeah, yeah. Keep in touch and send me a link for the video. And it was good talking to you. I
Yeah,
enjoyed
yeah.
it.
I'll
Yeah.
email it to you, and yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. Yeah,
Okay, brilliant. See
you
ya.
take care. Yeah, see you later.